The halls of Axiom Prime stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. They were made of crystal that sang when the light touched it. The crystal was not from any single world. It had been gathered from 100 different planets over 10,000 years. Each piece told a story. Each piece remembered. The Galactic Conclave had built these halls to last forever. They believed they would rule forever too. They had governed the known universe since before most species learned to walk upright. They had watched stars be born. They had watched stars die. They believed they understood everything there was to understand. They were wrong about many things, but they did not know this yet. The Grand Assembly Chamber sat at the heart of Axiom Prime. It was a massive room shaped like a sphere cut in half. The ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Representatives from 847 different species sat in seats arranged in great circles that climbed toward the sky. Each seat was carved from stone taken from that species' homeworld. This was tradition. This was law. Your seat connected you to your planet, your people, your history. The Velkari sat in chairs of black volcanic glass. Their long bodies coiled around the seats like snakes made of shadow. They had been members of the conclave for 9,000 years. They considered themselves wise. The Scythen floated in pools of liquid mercury that had been transported from their ocean world. They had no solid form. They spoke through vibrations in the metal. They had joined the conclave 8,000 years ago. They considered themselves patient. The Moorpath sat in chairs grown from living wood that still sprouted leaves. They were tall and thin, with bark-like skin and eyes that glowed green. They had joined 6,000 years ago. They considered themselves enlightened. There were 847 species in the Grand Assembly. Each one believed it deserved its place. Each one had been tested. Each one had been judged. Each one had been accepted. But there was one seat that had no occupant. It sat at the very edge of the chamber, far from the center where the important decisions were made. It was not made of volcanic glass or liquid mercury or living wood. It was made of rough gray granite mixed with veins of iron. It was simple. It was crude. It looked like something a primitive species might create in its earliest days. The elder races called this seat the Orphan's Throne. High Arbiter. Thesson Valmore had walked past this empty chair 10,000 times during his long life. He was a Velkari, one of the oldest species in the conclave. His black scales had faded to gray with age. His eyes had seen empires rise and fall. He had served as High Arbiter for 300 years. He stopped in front of the empty chair now, as he sometimes did when the chamber was empty. The granite felt cold under his fingers. The iron veins were rough, like the surface of a primitive planet. Still waiting, he whispered to himself. Still empty. The founders of the conclave had placed this chair here 10,000 years ago. They had been explorers then, mapping the galaxy and looking for life. They had found a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the universe. The planet had water and air and warmth. It had simple creatures swimming in its oceans. The founders had seen potential. They had done what they always did with promising worlds. They had planted seeds. Not literal seeds, but something more important. They had adjusted the planet's development. They had pushed evolution in certain directions. They had given life a little help. Then they had carved this chair from stone taken from that blue world, and they had placed it in the Grand Assembly. Someday they believed the creatures on that planet would develop intelligence. Someday they would reach for the stars. Someday they would find their way to Axiom Prime, and they would take their rightful place among the great species of the galaxy. The founders had been optimistic. They had believed in potential. They had believed in patience. But the founders were long dead now, and patience had run out. Thesson remembered the debates that had raged through the chamber over the centuries. He remembered watching the monitoring probes send back images from that distant blue world. He remembered seeing the creatures there change and grow. They had climbed down from trees. They had learned to walk upright. They had discovered fire and tools and language. He remembered feeling hope. But then he had watched them turn those tools into weapons. He had watched them kill each other in numbers that made no sense. They fought over land. They fought over resources. They fought over ideas. They fought over the color of their skin. They fought over which invisible gods they believed in. The conclave watched it all. They watched the humans, for that is what the creatures called themselves, build great cities and then burn them down. They watched them develop medicine and then create diseases. They watched them write poetry and then write declarations of war. They watched them split the atom. That moment had changed everything. Tassan remembered the emergency session that had been called. Representatives from every species had gathered to watch the images from the monitoring probes. They had seen the flash of light. They had seen the mushroom cloud rise into the sky. They had seen an entire city vanish in an instant. The humans had created a weapon that could destroy worlds, and they had used it on themselves. They are too dangerous, the Valkyrie representative had declared. They cannot be allowed to join us. They are too unstable, the Scythene had agreed. They will bring chaos to everything we have built. They are too primitive, the Morpath had added. They still believe in gods and magic. They have not evolved past their animal nature. The debate had lasted for days. Some species argued that the humans deserved a chance. They pointed to human art and music and literature. They pointed to human compassion and love and sacrifice. They argued that every species had dark chapters in its history. But the fear was stronger than the hope. The vote was called. It was unanimous. Humanity's future membership in the conclave was revoked before it was ever offered. The empty chair would remain empty. The experiment had failed. Tassan had voted with the majority. He had believed it was the right thing to do. He had believed they were protecting the galaxy from a species that would only bring destruction. He had not thought about it much since then. There were more important matters to attend to. The conclave governed 847 species across millions of worlds. There were trade disputes to resolve, entreaties to negotiate, and conflicts to prevent. One failed experiment on one small planet was not worth dwelling on, but sometimes when the chamber was empty and the crystal halls were quiet, Tessin would find himself standing in front of the orphan's throne. He would touch the rough granite and wonder. The humans had continued to develop after the vote. The monitoring probes kept sending back images, though fewer people watched them now. The humans had walked on their moon. They had sent machines to other planets in their system. They had built a network of communication that connected their entire world. They had also fought more wars. They had also polluted their planet. They had also come close to destroying themselves several times. But they were still there, still alive, still reaching. Tassan found this troubling. Most species that failed the conclave's early tests destroyed themselves within a few centuries. The humans had been given every opportunity to wipe themselves out. They had nuclear weapons and climate change and resource shortages. They had hatred and greed and fear. Yet they survived. He did not understand how. He did not want to understand. Understanding the humans would mean accepting that the conclave might have made a mistake, and the conclave did not make mistakes. The door to the chamber opened behind him. Tessin turned to see Subarbiter Krell approaching. Krell was young for a Valkyrie, only 600 years old. He was ambitious and efficient and completely loyal to the conclave. "Hi, Arbiter," Krell said, bowing his head. "You asked me to report any unusual activity in the monitored sectors." "I did," Tessin replied. "What have you found?" Krell hesitated. This was unusual. Krell never hesitated. "Perhaps it would be better if you saw for yourself," Krell said. "The observation center has detected something in the outer territories." They walked together through the crystal halls. Other representatives passed them, bowing their heads in respect. Tassan acknowledged each one with a small nod. He had learned long ago that small courtesies maintained big alliances. The observation center was a dome-shaped room filled with screens and sensors and instruments that could detect a single ship across half the galaxy. Technicians from a dozen species worked at various stations, monitoring the vast territory that the conclave controlled. Krell led Tessin to a large screen at the center of the room. The image showed a region of space near the edge of conclave territory. It was unremarkable space. No major trade routes, no valuable resources, no strategic importance. But there was something there now. "Magnify," Tessin ordered. The image grew larger. Tessin's eyes widened. Ships, hundreds of ships. They were crude things, built from metal and composite materials. They were not elegant like conclave vessels. They were bulky and functional and covered with what looked like patchwork repairs. But they were there, in conclave space, where they should not be. Where did they come from? Tassan asked. We traced their trajectory, Krell said. His voice was steady, but Tassan could hear the tension underneath. They came from the outer sectors, from a system with a yellow star and a small blue planet. Tessin felt his scales tighten. That is not possible. We verified the readings multiple times, Krell said. The ships are using a form of faster-than-light travel that we have not seen before. It appears to be based on technology they acquired from our monitoring probes. They reverse-engineered our technology? Yes, High Arbiter. It took them several decades, but they succeeded. The Sands stared at the screen. The ships were moving slowly but steadily toward Axiom Prime. They were not hiding. They were not trying to slip past conclave defenses unnoticed. They were flying in a clear formation, visible to anyone who cared to look. Have they responded to hails? We have attempted to contact them 17 times, Krell said. They have not responded to any of our standard protocols. Then how do we know who they are? Krell touched a control panel. The screen changed to show a single message that had been broadcast on all frequencies as the ships entered conclave space. It was simple text, transmitted in the mathematical language that the conclave used for first contact situations. The message read, "We are humanity. Your monitoring probes told us everything. We know about the chair. We know about the vote. We are coming to claim what is ours." Tessin read the message 3 times. He could not believe what he was seeing. How many ships? He finally asked. 247, Krell replied. They are not warships. Our scans indicate they are colony vessels, research stations, and what appear to be diplomatic cruisers. Diplomatic cruisers, the Sen repeated. The words tasted strange in his mouth. They think they can negotiate with us? It appears so, High Arbiter. What are your orders? The Sen looked at the screen for a long moment. The human fleet was still far from Axiom Prime. It would take them several days to arrive at their current speed. There was time to respond. There was time to decide. But what decision was there to make? The conclave had voted. Humanity had been rejected. They had no right to be in conclave space. They had no right to approach Axiom Prime. They had no right to claim anything. Send a message, Tassan ordered. Inform them that they are trespassing in conclave territory. Inform them that they must halt their advance and submit to inspection. Inform them that failure to comply will be considered an act of aggression. And if they do not comply? Tassan turned and looked toward the Grand Assembly Chamber. Through the crystal walls, he could see the distant shape of the orphan's throne. It had been empty for 10,000 years. Then we will remind them why the conclave has ruled the galaxy for so long, he said. We will remind them that they were rejected for good reason. We will remind them that their place is on their small blue planet, not among the stars. Krell bowed and left to carry out the orders. Tassan remained in the observation center, watching the screen. The human ships continued their steady advance. They did not slow down. They did not change course. They moved with a purpose that Tessin found unsettling. He had underestimated them. The entire conclave had underestimated them. They had watched the humans destroy each other for centuries and assumed that self-destruction was inevitable. They had watched the humans struggle with their base nature and assumed that evolution had failed. But the humans had not destroyed themselves. They had not remained trapped on their small planet. They had reached for the stars just as the founders had predicted so long ago. They were coming. And Tessin realized with a cold certainty that settled deep in his ancient bones that nothing would ever be the same. The empty chair had waited for 10,000 years. The species it was meant for had been rejected before they even knew it existed. The conclave had made its decision and moved on to other matters. But the humans had not moved on. The humans had not accepted their rejection. The humans were coming to claim their right, and they had not asked for permission. Tassan watched the fleet approach and wondered if the founders had known this would happen. He wondered if they had seen something in that small blue planet that the current conclave had missed. He wondered if the vote that had seemed so right at the time had been the biggest mistake in the history of the galaxy. The crystal halls of Axiom Prime sang in the light, as they had for 10,000 years. But the song seemed different now. It seemed to hold a note of warning. Something was coming that the conclave had never faced before. Something that refused to accept no for an answer. Humanity was coming. And the empty chair was waiting. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and looked at the stars. They were different here. The constellations she had memorized as a child on Earth were gone, replaced by patterns she did not recognize. She was further from home than any human had ever been. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The bridge of the Defiance was cramped and functional. It had been built for efficiency, not comfort. Every surface was covered with screens and controls and readouts. The air recyclers hummed constantly. The artificial gravity occasionally flickered when the engines strained too hard. The ship was not beautiful, but it worked. That was what mattered. Behind her, the rest of the bridge crew worked at their stations. Lieutenant Marcus Chen handled communications. Commander Sarah Okonkwo managed tactical operations. Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka kept the engines running despite all odds. They were the best humanity had to offer. They had trained for this mission for years. They had given up everything to be here, and they were all afraid. Elena could see it in their eyes, in the way they gripped their controls too tightly, in the way they kept glancing at the view screen. They were afraid of what was coming. Good. Fear kept people sharp. Fear kept people alive. Captain, Marcus said, we're receiving another hail from Axiom Prime. That makes 23. What does it say? Same as the others. We are ordered to halt and submit to inspection. Failure to comply will be considered an act of aggression. Marcus paused. They seemed very serious about the aggression part. Elena smiled. It was not a friendly smile. They should have thought about that before they decided we weren't worth talking to. The view screen showed the space ahead of them. Axiom Prime was still several hours away, but they could already see the Conclave defense fleet that had been dispatched to intercept them. Hundreds of ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had built. They hung in the space like predators waiting for prey. Elena was not impressed. Sarah, she said, what's your assessment of their fleet? Commander Okonkwo studied her tactical readouts. She was a tall woman with dark skin and sharp eyes. Her grandfather had been a diplomat. Her father had been a soldier. She had inherited skills from both. Their ships are more advanced than ours, she said. Better weapons, better shields, better engines. In a straight fight, they would destroy us in minutes. But they're deployed in a defensive formation. They're not expecting a fight. They're expecting us to stop when we see how outmatched we are. Elena nodded. And that's their weakness. They've never met anyone who didn't stop. She walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the view screen. The Conclave fleet grew larger as they approached. She could make out individual ships now. Elegant vessels of crystal and metal that seemed to flow rather than fly. They were beautiful in the way that a predator is beautiful. Efficient, deadly, perfect. The human fleet was none of those things. The ships were bulky and scarred and held together by repairs and determination. They had been built in secret, hidden from the monitoring probes that watched Earth. They had been designed by scientists who were told that faster-than-light travel was impossible. They had been constructed by workers who knew they might never see their families again. 247 ships, colony vessels carrying hundreds of thousands of civilians who had volunteered to leave everything behind. Research stations packed with equipment and experiments and hope. Diplomatic cruisers that were really just converted freighters with better communication arrays. Not a single weapon among them. This was not an invasion fleet. It was a statement. We're entering their engagement range, Sarah reported. They're powering up weapons. Do they know we're unarmed? They know. Their scans would have detected it immediately. Elena turned to face her crew. They were all watching her, waiting for orders. They trusted her to get them through this. They trusted her to lead them into the unknown. She had never wanted this responsibility. She had been a cargo pilot before all this started, running supplies between Earth and the Mars colonies. She had been good at her job but unremarkable. She had never expected to be chosen for anything important. But then the transmission had been discovered. One of Earth's deep space monitoring stations had intercepted a signal from the Conclave. It had taken years to decrypt, but when they finally understood what it said, everything changed. The message contained the complete history of the Conclave's observations of Earth, It contained records of the debates about humanity's worthiness. It contained the vote that had rejected them before they even knew aliens existed. It contained the truth. Humanity had been judged. Humanity had been found wanting. Humanity had been dismissed as a failed experiment, too violent and too primitive to join the galactic community. And humanity had never been given a chance to speak for itself. The discovery had changed everything. Governments that had been enemies found common ground. Resources that had been wasted on wars were redirected to space exploration. Scientists who had competed against each other began to collaborate. Humanity had looked up at the stars and realized they were not alone, and that they had been rejected by everyone they would ever meet. Some people had wanted to give up. They had argued that if the galaxy didn't want humanity, then humanity should stay on Earth and mind its own business. They had argued that challenging the conclave was suicide. But most people had felt something else, something older and deeper than fear, something that had driven humanity through every obstacle in its history: anger. They had been judged without a trial. They had been rejected without a chance to prove themselves. They had been dismissed by creatures who had watched them suffer and done nothing to help. The conclave had made a mistake. They had assumed that humanity would accept their decision. They had assumed that a species as young and primitive as humans would know their place. They had not understood humans at all. "Captain," Marcus said, "the lead conclave ship is hailing us directly. They say they want to speak with whoever is in command." Elena straightened her uniform. It was not an elegant uniform, plain gray fabric with Earth's symbol on the shoulder, but she wore it with pride. "Put them through." The view screen flickered. The image of the conclave fleet was replaced by a face that was definitely not human. The creature had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Its eyes were large and completely black. It had no visible mouth, but its voice came through clearly, translated by equipment that humanity had built from stolen technology. "I am Fleet Commander Zorvan of the Galactic Conclave," the creature said. "You are in violation of conclave law. You must halt your advance immediately or face the consequences." Elena looked at the alien face on her screen. This was the first time any human had spoken directly with an alien. This moment would be remembered forever. She needed to choose her words carefully. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship Defiance," she said. "We are not in violation of any law that we agreed to. We do not recognize the conclave's authority over humanity." There was a pause. Zorvan's expression did not change. His face might not have been capable of changing, but Elena sensed surprise in his silence. "Your recognition is not required," Zorvan said. "Conclave law applies to all species within our territory. You have entered our territory without permission. This is trespassing." "We didn't ask for permission," Elena replied. "We didn't ask because we knew you would say no. You already said no. 10,000 years ago, you built a chair for us. Then you voted to never let us sit in it. You judged us without meeting us. You rejected us without hearing us." Another pause, longer this time. "How do you know about the chair?" Elena smiled. "You left probes watching our planet for 10,000 years. You thought we wouldn't notice? You thought we wouldn't eventually figure out how to intercept your transmissions?" She leaned forward. "We know everything, Fleet Commander. We know about the debates. We know about the vote. We know that you watched us suffer through wars and plagues and disasters, and you did nothing. You could have helped us. You could have guided us. Instead, you watched us like we were animals in a zoo." "You were not ready," Zorvan said. "You are still not ready. Your species has not evolved past its violent nature. You would bring chaos and destruction to everything the Conclave has built." "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe you just didn't want competition. Maybe you were comfortable being the ones in charge. And you didn't want some young species coming along and challenging your authority. This is absurd. The Conclave has maintained peace in the galaxy for 10,000 years. We do not fear competition. We simply have standards. Standards that your species has failed to meet." Elena turned to look at her crew. They were watching her with pride. They were afraid, but they were also determined. They had not come this far to turn back now. "Here's what's going to happen," Elena said, turning back to the screen. "We're going to continue our advance to Axiom Prime. We're not going to fire on anyone. We're not going to threaten anyone. We're just going to fly right through your fleet and park ourselves in orbit around your capital. We will not allow that. Then you'll have to destroy us. 247 ships, hundreds of thousands of unarmed civilians, scientists and teachers and children. You'll have to kill them all while the entire galaxy watches. Elena paused. How do you think that will look? The mighty conclave, slaughtering helpless refugees because they dared to ask for a seat at the table? Zorvan was silent. We're not here to fight, Elena continued. We're here to talk. We want what you promised us 10,000 years ago, a place in the galactic community. We want the chance to prove ourselves. We want to be judged fairly by our actions, not by the fears of creatures who never bothered to meet us. The decision has already been made. The vote was held. Humanity was rejected. Then hold another vote. Let us make our case. Let us show you who we really are, not who you assumed we would be. The communication ended abruptly. The view screen returned to showing the conclave fleet. Well, Mom, Marcus said, that went well. Elena laughed. It was not much of a laugh, but it helped break the tension. Now we wait. They'll contact us again. How do you know? Because they could have destroyed us already. They didn't. That means someone is thinking about what I said. Someone is wondering if maybe we have a point. She was right. 3 hours later, as the human fleet approached the conclave's defensive line, another message came through. It was not from Fleet Commander Zorvan. It was from Axiom Prime itself. The message was brief. The Grand Assembly has agreed to receive a representative from your fleet. One ship may proceed to Axiom Prime. All others must remain at their current position. This is not a negotiation. Elena read the message twice. It was not much. It was barely anything at all. But it was a crack in the wall. It was proof that the conclave was not as unified as it pretended to be. One ship, Sarah said. That's a trap. They'll take you hostage. Maybe, Elena agreed, but we didn't come all this way to stop at the door. She stood up and addressed the entire fleet through the communication system. Her voice was broadcast to every ship, heard by every human who had made this journey. This is Captain Vasquez. The conclave has agreed to receive one ship at Axiom Prime. The rest of the fleet will remain here and wait. I know this is not what we hoped for. I know you wanted to fly into their capital with all flags waving, but this is a start. This is our foot in the door. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Humanity has been waiting for this moment for 10,000 years. Even if we didn't know it, we were judged and rejected by creatures who never bothered to meet us. They decided we weren't worthy based on our worst moments. They saw our wars and our cruelty and our mistakes, and they thought that was all we were. Elena looked at the view screen, at the alien fleet that blocked their path, at the stars that had seemed so far away just a few generations ago. They were wrong. We are more than our worst moments. We are also our best moments, our art and our music, our compassion and our love, our stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seems hopeless. We walked on our moon, we cured diseases, we built machines that let us talk to each other across oceans. We kept dreaming of the stars even when we didn't know if we would ever reach them. Her crew was watching her. Hundreds of thousands of humans across 200 ships were listening. We didn't ask for permission to come here. We didn't beg for acceptance. We built our own ships, and we taught ourselves to fly them, and we crossed the galaxy because that's what humans do. We don't wait to be invited. We don't accept being told that we're not good enough. We prove ourselves through our actions. She took a breath. I'm going to Axiom Prime. I'm going to walk into their assembly and tell them that humanity deserves a chance. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't know if we'll succeed. But I know this. We didn't come all this way to fail. We came here to claim our right, and we will not stop until we do. The response was silence at first. Then slowly a sound began to build. It was coming from the communication system. It was coming from every ship in the fleet. Applause, cheering, hope. Elena closed the channel and turned to her crew. They were all smiling now, even through their fear. Set course for Axiom Prime, she ordered. Full speed ahead. What about the conclave fleet? Marcus asked. They haven't moved out of our way. Elena looked at the alien ships blocking their path. They were beautiful and deadly and completely certain of their own superiority. "They'll move," she said. And they did. As the Defiance accelerated toward Axiom Prime, the Conclave fleet slowly parted. It was not a retreat. They were too proud for that. It was more like a reluctant acknowledgement. They could not destroy an unarmed ship without proving everything Elena had said about them. So they watched. They watched as a single ugly human ship flew past their gleaming fleet. They watched as Elena Vasquez approached their capital with nothing but words and determination and the weight of 10,000 years of unfair judgment behind her. They did not know it yet, but the galaxy was about to change. Humanity had arrived, and they had not asked for permission. David Okonkwo had never wanted to be a diplomat. He had wanted to be a musician. As a child growing up in Lagos, he had spent every free moment playing the piano his grandmother had kept in her small apartment. He had learned songs from all over the world. He had dreamed of playing in concert halls and recording albums and sharing music with anyone who would listen. But his father had been a diplomat. His grandfather had been a diplomat. His great-grandfather had helped negotiate treaties in the years after the colonial era. The Okonkwo family had a tradition of speaking for others, of finding common ground, of turning enemies into allies through patience and words. David had fought against this tradition for years. He had insisted that he would choose his own path. He had studied music in university and formed a jazz band and played in small clubs across West Africa. But when humanity intercepted the Conclave's transmissions, everything changed. Suddenly, the world needed diplomats more than ever. Suddenly, the skills that had been passed down through his family for generations became the most important skills humanity possessed. And so David had put down his music and picked up the weight of representing his entire species. He stood now in the center of the Grand Assembly Chamber, the largest room any human had ever entered. The crystal ceiling stretched so far above him that he could not see it clearly. Representatives from 847 species sat in their homeworld seats, arranged in great circles that climbed toward the sky. Every eye was on him. He was completely alone. Captain Vasquez had brought him here on the Defiance, but she had been forced to remain on the ship. The Conclave had agreed to receive one representative, and only one. David had volunteered immediately. He had been preparing for this moment for years, studying every piece of data humanity had gathered about the Conclave and its members. He had studied the Valkyrie and their love of order and hierarchy. He had studied the Scythen and their patience and their long memories. He had studied the Morpath and their complex system of honor and shame. He had studied all 847 species as best he could, trying to understand how they thought and what they valued. Now he stood before them all, and he realized that no amount of study could have prepared him for this moment. High Arbiter. Thesson Valmore looked down at him from the central platform. The ancient Valkyrie's gray scales caught the light as he moved. His eyes were cold and unreadable. "You stand before the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Conclave," Thesson said. His voice echoed through the massive chamber. "You have been granted this audience against the wishes of many. Do not waste this opportunity." David bowed his head slightly, the gesture of respect he had practiced 1,000 times. "I am grateful for this audience. I am Ambassador David Okonkwo, and I speak for humanity." Humanity, Thesson repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "We know of humanity. We have watched your species for 10,000 years. We have seen what you are capable of." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. David heard words in languages he did not understand, translated by the small device hidden in his ear. Primitive, violent, unworthy. "You have invoked the ancient right of petition," Thesson continued. "You claim that humanity deserves a place among the species of the Conclave. Before we consider this claim, we must first establish whether you have the standing to make it. Therefore, we invoke the trial of Unworth." David felt a chill run down his spine. He had studied the trial of Unworth. It was an ancient protocol designed to humiliate young species into abandoning their petitions. No species had ever passed it. Most gave up before it was finished. "The trial of Unworth consists of 5 challenges," Thesson explained. "Humanity will be judged on its technological contribution, its cultural value, its diplomatic stability, its resource management, and its spiritual evolution. Failure in any challenge will end your petition permanently." Do you accept these terms? David looked around the chamber. 847 species watched him, waiting for him to fail. They expected him to refuse or to give up or to prove himself unworthy through his actions. I accept, he said. The trial began immediately. The Velkari were the first to present their challenge. A representative slithered forward, his long body moving with unsettling grace. He carried a device that projected images into the air above the assembly. The first challenge concerns technological contribution, the Velkari said. A species that joins the conclave must demonstrate that it can add to the collective knowledge of the galaxy. Let us examine what humanity has contributed. The images appeared. They showed early human tools, crude stone axes and wooden spears. They showed the progression of human technology through the ages. The invention of the wheel, the development of writing, the construction of buildings. Your species is young, the Velkari continued. In the time that humanity has existed, the conclave has mapped the movements of stars and developed technologies that your scientists cannot even imagine. You have achieved nothing that we did not achieve billions of years ago. More images appeared. They showed human weapons, swords and guns and bombs. They showed the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They showed nuclear tests and missile launches and military parades. And when you did develop technology of significance, you used it to destroy each other. You split the atom and immediately built weapons. You discovered the secrets of genetics and immediately tried to create super soldiers. Your technological progress is inseparable from your violent nature. The assembly murmured in agreement. David waited until the Velkari was finished, then spoke. Everything you have shown is true, he said. Humanity has created weapons. We have used technology for destruction, but that is not the whole story. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was a translator similar to the one in his ear, but far more advanced. He had built it himself, using technology reverse-engineered from conclave monitoring probes. Your probes watched Earth for 10,000 years, David said. We found one of them. We took it apart. We studied it. We learned from it. He held up the translator. This device can translate any language in your database into any other language in your database, in real time. Your translators are better, I'm sure, but we built this from nothing. We built this without help, without teachers, without any of the resources you have access to. He set the translator on the floor in front of him. You had billions of years to develop your technology. We had a few decades with a single broken probe, and we caught up enough to get here, to stand in this chamber, to speak with you face to face. He looked at the Velkari. That is our contribution. Not what we have already done, but what we are capable of doing. We learn fast. We adapt fast. We never stop trying to understand. The assembly was silent. David could not tell if his words had made any impact. The second challenge was presented by the Scythene. A pool of liquid mercury rose from one of the seats and flowed toward the center of the chamber, forming into a shifting, fluid shape. The second challenge concerns cultural value, the Scythene said. Its voice came from vibrations in the metal, translated by David's device. A species that joins the conclave must demonstrate that it can contribute to the art and thought of the galaxy. Images appeared again. This time they showed human art, paintings and sculptures and buildings. But the images were selected carefully. They showed religious icons and statues of conquerors and monuments to war. They showed art that celebrated violence and power and domination. Your culture is obsessed with death, the Scythian observed. Your stories are about battles and conflicts. Your heroes are warriors. Your art glorifies destruction. David listened to the accusations. He had prepared for this moment. May I show you something? He asked. The assembly agreed. David connected his translator to the chamber's display system. It had taken him weeks to figure out how to do this, but he had managed. Music filled the chamber. It was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the fourth movement, the Ode to Joy. The alien representatives listened in silence as the music swelled and grew. David watched their reactions. He could not read most of their expressions, but he saw movement. He saw stillness. He saw something that might have been attention. When the music ended, he spoke again. This was written by a man who was completely deaf. He could not hear a single note of what he composed. He wrote it anyway because he believed that music was worth creating even if he would never experience it himself. David paused. You showed images of our violence. You didn't show this. You didn't show the millions of humans who create beauty every day, who paint and write and dance and sing, not because they will be rewarded, but because creation is part of who we are. He played another piece of music. It was a recording of a woman singing a song from Mali, ancient and beautiful and full of longing. This is a song that has been passed down for generations. It tells the story of a mother who lost her child to disease. It is sad and painful and honest. We create this because we need to express what we feel. We create this because sharing our pain makes it easier to bear. The Scythian did not respond immediately. David could not tell if the strange creature was moved or merely processing information. The third challenge was presented by the Moorpath. The tall, bark-skinned alien rose from his chair of living wood and spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. The third challenge concerns diplomatic stability. A species that joins the conclave must demonstrate that it can resolve disputes without violence. The images this time were the worst. They showed human wars throughout history, ancient battles and medieval sieges and modern conflicts. They showed concentration camps and mass graves and cities in flames. They showed the broken bodies of soldiers and the tears of refugees and the faces of children who had seen too much. Your species has been at war for its entire existence, the Moorpath said. You have never achieved lasting peace. You have never stopped killing each other. Even now, even as you stand in this chamber speaking of unity, there are conflicts on your planet. There are humans killing other humans for resources and territory and beliefs. David could not deny this. It was true. All of it was true. What can you say to defend this? The Moorpath asked. What excuse can you offer for such constant, senseless violence? David was silent for a long moment. He looked at the images floating in the air above him, all the death and destruction that his species had caused. He thought about his grandfather, who had survived a civil war. He thought about his grandmother, who had lost brothers to violence. He thought about all the stories of suffering that had been passed down through his family. I have no excuse, he finally said. What you have shown is true. Humanity has caused immeasurable suffering. We have killed each other over land and resources and ideas. We have done terrible things. The assembly waited. But I would ask you this. When you were young, were you any different? Silence. The conclave is 10,000 years old. But the species in this room are much older than that. Billions of years, some of you. And in all that time, did you never fight? Did you never make war on each other? Did you never commit atrocities that you later regretted? David looked at the Moorpath. Your species fought a civil war 3 million years ago that killed half your population. I know this because it's in the records your probes transmitted. You recovered. You evolved. You became peaceful. But you weren't always that way. He turned to the Velkari. Your species conquered and enslaved 12 other species before you learned that cooperation was more profitable than domination. You changed. You grew. But you weren't always what you are now. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. Humanity is young. We are at the beginning of our journey. Yes, we still fight. Yes, we still make terrible mistakes. But we are learning. Every generation is a little better than the one before. Every century, we find new ways to resolve our conflicts without violence. We have treaties now that prevent the worst atrocities. We have international organizations that try to keep the peace. We are trying. He took a breath. You look at us and see what we are. I am asking you to see what we can become. Give us time. Give us a chance. We will not disappoint you. The fourth challenge came from a species David did not recognize, a cluster of floating crystals that spoke in harmonics that his translator struggled to interpret. The fourth challenge concerns resource management. Your species has nearly destroyed your own planet through careless exploitation of its resources. Images of pollution and deforestation and climate change filled the chamber. Images of dying oceans and extinct species and landscapes turned to desert. David did not wait for the accusations to finish. Yes, he said. We almost killed our own world. We pumped poison into the air and trash into the water, and we nearly made our planet uninhabitable. He paused. And then we stopped. Not all at once, not perfectly, but we recognized what we were doing, and we started to fix it. We developed new technologies. We changed our behavior. We planted forests and cleaned rivers, and found ways to generate power without destroying ourselves. He looked at the crystals. We made mistakes, and then we learned from them. That is what humanity does. We fail, and then we try again. The fifth and final challenge was presented by a species that seemed to be made entirely of light. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The final challenge concerns spiritual evolution. A species that joins the conclave must have moved beyond primitive superstitions and embraced a rational understanding of the universe. Images of religious ceremonies appeared, churches and temples and mosques, rituals and prayers and offerings, holy books and prophets and miracles. Your species still believes in invisible gods, the light being said. You still pray to beings that do not exist. You still fight wars over which mythology is correct. You have not evolved past your need for comforting fictions. This was the challenge David had feared most. He was not a religious man himself, but he knew that billions of humans drew strength from their faith. How could he defend something he did not share? He thought about his grandmother. She had been deeply religious. She had prayed every day, and she had also been the kindest, wisest person he had ever known. Her faith had not made her weak or irrational. It had given her strength to survive things that would have broken anyone else. Faith is not the same as ignorance, David said. Many humans believe in things that cannot be proven scientifically. But that does not mean we are incapable of scientific thought. We landed on our moon. We mapped our genome. We discovered the fundamental laws of physics. We did all of this while also believing in things beyond what we can see and measure. He looked at the light being. You call our faiths comforting fictions. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps there are no gods, no souls, no meaning beyond what we create for ourselves. But I would ask you this. Is it wrong to seek comfort? Is it wrong to look for meaning in a universe that often seems cold and empty? Is it wrong to believe that there might be something more than what we can observe? He spread his hands. Humanity's religions have caused great harm. I will not deny that. But they have also inspired great acts of love and sacrifice and compassion. They have given people the strength to endure unimaginable suffering. They have created communities and traditions that have lasted for thousands of years. He paused. We are not perfect, but we are trying to understand ourselves and our place in the universe. Isn't that what spiritual evolution really means? The 5 challenges were complete. David stood in the center of the chamber, exhausted and uncertain. He had done his best. He had defended humanity as well as he could, but he did not know if it was enough. High Arbiter Thesson Valmore rose from his seat. The trial of Unworth is complete, he announced. The assembly will now deliberate. The human representative will withdraw while we discuss. David bowed his head and walked toward the exit. The crystal doors seemed impossibly far away. Every step felt like a mile. He could feel 847 species watching him, judging him, deciding the fate of his world. As he reached the doors, a voice stopped him. Human, he turned. It was the Moorpath representative, the one who had presented the challenge about diplomatic stability. Your music, the Moorpath said. The first piece you played. What was it called? The Ode to Joy, David replied. The Moorpath was silent for a moment. Its green eyes seemed to glow brighter. It was beautiful, the alien said. I have not heard anything like it in 3 million years. David nodded slowly. Thank you. He walked out of the chamber, not knowing if humanity had been saved or condemned. But for the first time since he had arrived on Axiom Prime, he felt something like hope. Perhaps the galaxy was not as closed as it seemed. Perhaps there was room for humanity after all. The vote was held behind closed doors, as all important conclave votes were. The representatives of 847 species deliberated for 3 days while David Okonkwo waited on the defiance. He did not sleep. He barely ate. He spent hours staring at the view screen, watching the crystal spires of Axiom Prime glow against the blackness of space. Captain Vasquez tried to comfort him, but there was nothing to say. Either humanity would be accepted or it would not. Either their long journey had meant something or it had been for nothing. On the fourth day, the message came. The vote was 712 against and 135 in favor. Humanity's petition had been rejected. David read the message 3 times before the words truly sank in. All his preparation, all his arguments, all his hope, none of it had been enough. The conclave had listened to him speak about music and progress and potential, and they had voted no anyway. He walked to the bridge in silence. The crew watched him with worried eyes. Elena stood at the center of the room, her face unreadable. "We failed," David said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. "They rejected us." Elena nodded slowly. She had expected this outcome. She had prepared for it. "What now?" someone asked. David could not tell who. "Now," Elena said, "we wait." It seemed like a strange thing to say. What were they waiting for? The conclave had made its decision. There was nothing left to do but go home and accept defeat. But Elena knew something that David did not. She had been a cargo pilot for 20 years before she became a captain. She had learned how to read people and how to read markets. She understood that every decision created winners and losers, and that the losers often wanted something different than the winners. The rejection had not been unanimous. 135 species had voted in favor of humanity. That was a minority, but it was not nothing. It meant that nearly 1 in 6 representatives had been willing to go against the majority. It meant that the conclave was not as unified as it pretended to be. Elena was waiting for those 135 species to make their move. The first contact came 2 days later. A small ship approached the human fleet, requesting permission to dock with the Defiance. It was not a conclave vessel. It was private, belonging to a species called the Kreth Collective. Elena had studied them, hive-minded engineers who communicated through chemical signals and built some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. She granted permission. The Kreth representative was unlike any alien David had met. It looked like a mass of connected insects, each one about the size of a human thumb. Together they formed a rough approximation of a humanoid shape, constantly shifting and reforming as individual units moved around. "We watched your trial," the Kreth said. Its voice was created by hundreds of tiny wings vibrating in unison. "We were fascinated." "Fascinated," David repeated. "Why?" "Because you reminded us of ourselves. Many cycles ago, when our collective was young, we were rejected by the conclave for similar reasons. We were considered too strange, too unpredictable, too different from the established species. We had to prove ourselves over thousands of years before we were finally accepted." David felt a spark of hope, the first he had felt since the vote. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because we believe the conclave made a mistake. Your species has qualities that are rare in the galaxy. You are adaptable, you are creative, you learn quickly, and you do not give up." The Kreth paused, its form shifting. "We would like to propose an exchange." "What kind of exchange?" "Knowledge. We will share some of our technology with you. In return, you will share your art, your music, your stories. We have existed for millions of years, but our culture has become stagnant. We solve problems, but we have forgotten how to dream. Perhaps you can teach us to dream again." It was not the acceptance they had wanted, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a bridge to the other side. More contacts followed. The Alari came next. They were ancient beings, their species older than the conclave itself. They had once been the greatest poets and artists in the galaxy, but centuries of conforming to conclave standards had drained their creativity. They came to the Defiance and asked to study human literature. David gave them Shakespeare. He gave them Tolstoy and Austen and Marquez. He gave them the complete works of every human author he could find in the ship's database. The Alari read for 3 straight days. When they emerged from their quarters, their eyes were wet with something that might have been tears. "Your species is broken," one of them said. "You suffer and you struggle and you fail over and over again. But from that pain, you create beauty that we have not seen in a million years." The Alari bowed its head. "We will speak for you in the assembly. We will tell them what we have learned." Species after species came to the human fleet. Some were curious, some were sympathetic, some simply wanted to defy the conclave's decision. But all of them found something in humanity that they had not expected. The Velkari saw humanity's military history and found a species that understood the importance of hierarchy and discipline, qualities they valued. The Scythians studied humanity's long political experiments and saw a species that never stopped trying to build better societies, even when they failed repeatedly. The Morpeth heard human music and poetry and found echoes of their own ancient traditions they had almost forgotten in their pursuit of galactic respectability. Within months, the human fleet had become a gathering point for species who felt marginalized or ignored by the conclave. Ships from dozens of worlds orbited around the Defiance, forming an unofficial community that the conclave could not control. Elena named it New Geneva, after the city on Earth that had once been the center of international diplomacy. High Arbiter Thesson Valmore was not pleased. He called an emergency session of the Grand Assembly and demanded that all species cease their contact with humanity. He reminded them that the vote had been held, the decision had been made, and humanity had been rejected. Any species that continued to associate with the human fleet was undermining the authority of the conclave. "We have maintained order in this galaxy for 10,000 years, the San declared. We have done so by speaking with one voice, by enforcing our decisions, by refusing to allow chaos to spread. The humans are chaos. They are disruption. They must be contained." But it was too late. The species who had voted against humanity had expected them to leave. They had expected them to go back to their small planet and disappear. They had not expected them to stay, and they had not expected other species to rally around them. Elena was summoned to appear before the Grand Assembly. She arrived alone, walking through the crystal halls with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The San looked down at her from the High Arbiter's platform. His gray scales seemed to darken with anger. "You were rejected," he said. "You were told that humanity does not have a place in the conclave, yet you remain. You continue to pollute our territory with your presence." Elena smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We were rejected," she agreed, "but we were never told to leave. The trial of unworth determined whether we would be given a seat in your assembly. It did not determine whether we could exist in your space. This is semantics. You are not welcome here. And yet here we are." Elena looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species watching her. 37 species have established formal diplomatic relations with humanity in the past 3 months. 12 species have signed trade agreements with us. 8 species have requested cultural exchange programs. She turned back to Thessan. "It seems we are welcome somewhere." Thessan's voice was cold. "You have destabilized 10,000 years of political order. You have made enemies of powers you cannot imagine." "Have we?" Elena asked. "It seems to me that we have made friends, and that frightens you, doesn't it? Because as long as we were alone, you could ignore us. But now we have allies. Now we have a community. Now we are part of the galaxy, whether you like it or not." She took a step forward, and for a moment the ancient High Arbiter seemed to shrink. "Here's what you don't understand about humans," Elena said. "We don't need to win today. We're patient when we need to be. We plan for the long term, and we never forget." She turned to address the entire assembly. "You rejected us. Fine. We didn't need your permission anyway. We'll build our own relationships. We'll prove our worth through our actions. And someday, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100, maybe in 1,000, you'll look around and realize that humanity has become essential to everything the conclave does." She smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. "When that day comes, the empty chair will still be waiting, and we'll still be ready to sit in it." She walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response. Behind her, the assembly erupted in chaos. Species that had never spoken to each other before began to argue. Old alliances shifted. New factions formed. The conclave had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years by maintaining perfect unity. That unity was cracking, and humanity had caused it simply by refusing to go away. The years passed. New Geneva grew from a handful of ships into a permanent station, a massive construction of human and alien technology that orbited Axiom Prime like a second moon. It became a center of trade and culture and diplomacy. Species that had been ignored by the conclave for centuries found a home there. Ideas that had been suppressed found an audience. Art and music and stories from across the galaxy flowed through its corridors. Humanity changed too. The humans who had come on that first fleet were just the beginning. More ships arrived from Earth, bringing scientists and artists and engineers and ordinary people who wanted to be part of something new. They learned from the alien species they met. They adapted. They grew. They also taught. Human creativity became famous across the galaxy. Alien species commissioned human artists to create works that had never been imagined before. Human musicians collaborated with species who had forgotten how to dream. Human scientists worked alongside the Kreth Collective to develop technologies that combined the best of both cultures. And all the while, the empty chair sat in the Grand Assembly, waiting. David Okonkwo returned to Earth after the first year. He had done his part. He had spoken for humanity at the trial of unworth. Now it was time for others to take over. He went back to playing piano. He formed a new band. He recorded an album that was eventually translated into 47 alien languages and became one of the most popular pieces of music in the galaxy. He never stopped watching the stars. Elena Vasquez remained on New Geneva, guiding humanity's integration into galactic society. She became an elder stateswoman, respected even by species who had voted against humanity at the trial. When she died at the age of 93, representatives from over 100 species attended her memorial service. The words she had spoken to Thesson were carved on her tombstone. We never asked for permission. The conclave continued to rule the galaxy, but its power was fading. Species that had once followed its every decree now made their own decisions. Trade routes that had once been controlled by conclave regulations now flowed freely through New Geneva. The old order was crumbling, and something new was being built in its place. High Arbiter Thesson Valmore watched it all happening and could do nothing to stop it. He had underestimated humanity. The entire conclave had underestimated them. They had looked at a young species that fought wars and polluted its planet and believed in invisible gods. And they had assumed that such a species would never amount to anything. They had been wrong. Humans were not perfect. They made mistakes constantly. They fought among themselves and struggled with their own nature, and often failed to live up to their own ideals. But they never stopped trying, and in the end, that was what mattered. 50 years after the trial of unworth, a new crisis emerged that would change everything. A species called the Drath hegemony, a warlike empire that had long been kept in check by conclave threats, decided to test the new reality. They launched an invasion against 3 small systems that had aligned themselves with humanity's growing coalition. The conclave debated for weeks about how to respond. They argued about treaties and protocols and appropriate levels of force. They worried about escalation and precedent and the political implications of military action. While they debated, the Drath conquered 2 of the 3 systems, and then something unexpected happened. A fleet emerged from New Geneva. It was not a human fleet. It was a coalition of 43 species, ships from every corner of the galaxy, all flying under a single banner. The banner showed a small blue planet circled by stars. The coalition fleet was smaller than the Drath Armada and less advanced than conclave warships. But it was unified, it was determined, and it was led by commanders who understood that sometimes you had to fight not because you wanted to, but because the cost of not fighting was too high. The war lasted 8 months. The Drath hegemony fell. And when it was over, the galaxy looked at humanity with new eyes. They were not just dreamers and artists and stubborn outsiders anymore. They were leaders. They were builders of alliances. They were defenders of the weak. They were exactly what the conclave had always claimed to be, but had forgotten how to actually be. The empty chair had waited for 50 years. It would not wait much longer. Humanity's time was coming, and they had never stopped reaching for it. Amara Okonkwo was 6 years old when her grandfather told her about the empty chair. They sat together on the balcony of his home in Lagos, watching the sun set over the ocean. David Okonkwo was old now, his hair completely gray, and his hands not as steady as they once were. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear, and he still played the piano every evening after dinner. "There is a chair on Axiom Prime," he told her. "It was carved from the stone of our world 10,000 years ago. It was meant for humanity, but the aliens decided we were not worthy of sitting in it. Amara listened with the intensity that only children possess. She asked questions. She wanted to understand. I went there, David continued. I stood before all those alien species and I told them that humanity deserved a chance. But they voted against us. They said we were too violent, too primitive, too young. That's not fair, Amara said. No, it wasn't. David smiled at his granddaughter. But sometimes life isn't fair. The important thing is what you do when life isn't fair. Do you give up? Or do you keep fighting? You keep fighting, Amara said immediately. That's right. David put his hand on her head. Someday, Amara, you might have a chance to sit in that chair. Someday, you might be the one who claims what was always meant to be ours. Amara nodded seriously. She did not fully understand what her grandfather was telling her, but she remembered his words. She carried them with her through school and university and her long career in diplomacy. And now, 50 years later, she stood before the crystal doors of the Grand Assembly Chamber, preparing to keep the promise she had made on that balcony so long ago. The galaxy had changed since her grandfather's time. The conclave still existed, but its power had diminished greatly. New Geneva had grown from a gathering of ships into a major political force, an alternative center of power that offered species a different way of participating in galactic affairs. Species that had once been afraid to challenge the conclave now openly defied it, and humanity had changed most of all. The young species that had crossed the galaxy in crude ships was now one of the most influential civilizations in existence. Human technology had advanced rapidly, assisted by partnerships with the Kreth Collective and other allies. Human culture had spread to every corner of the galaxy. Human diplomats sat in councils and negotiations across hundreds of worlds. But one thing had not changed. The empty chair still sat in the Grand Assembly. The granite seat, carved from Earth's stone 10,000 years ago, had never been occupied. It was the last symbol of humanity's exclusion, the final reminder that the conclave had never formally accepted them. That was about to change. A High Arbiter, Thesson Valmore, had died 3 decades ago, replaced by a succession of leaders who struggled to maintain the conclave's relevance in a changing galaxy. The current High Arbiter was a Morpath named Kelos, one of the species that had allied with humanity after the Trial of Unworth. Kelos had called this session of the Grand Assembly specifically to address the human question. It was time, he believed, to acknowledge reality. Humanity was already part of the galaxy in every way that mattered. The empty chair was an embarrassment, but not everyone agreed. There were still species who remembered the original vote. There were still representatives who believed that humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too human to be trusted with a seat in the conclave. The old fears had not entirely disappeared. The debate had been raging for months. Factions had formed and dissolved. Alliances had shifted. The entire political structure of the conclave had been shaken by the question of whether to give humanity what it had always claimed as a right. And through it all, Amara had waited. She had learned patience from her grandfather. She had learned that sometimes the best strategy was simply to outlast your opponents. She had spent her entire career building relationships, earning trust, demonstrating through her actions that humanity could be a positive force in the galaxy. Now all that work was coming to a conclusion. The crystal doors opened. Amara walked into the Grand Assembly chamber alone. She was not announced. She was not escorted by guards or accompanied by assistants. She simply walked in, as her grandfather had walked in 50 years before. The chamber was exactly as he had described it. The crystal ceiling stretched toward infinity. The seats rose in great circles toward the sky. Representatives from 847 species watched her approach. But there was one difference now. The seats were not all full. Many of the species that had voted against humanity at the Trial of Unworth had aligned themselves with New Geneva in the decades since. They no longer attended conclave sessions or attended only when matters directly affected them. The great circles that had once been packed with representatives now had empty spaces, seats abandoned by species that had found a better way. Amara walked through the chamber without stopping. She passed representatives who watched her with curiosity or hostility or something in between. She walked past the central platform where High Arbiter Kelos stood, His bark-like skin creased with what might have been concern. She walked all the way to the edge of the chamber, to the rough granite chair with veins of iron, to the orphan's throne, and she sat down. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted in 100 languages. Representatives rose from their seats. Guards moved toward Amara, their weapons raised. The chaos was absolute. "This is unacceptable," a Velkari representative screamed. "She has no right. Remove her," another voice demanded. "She is trespassing." "The vote has not been held. This is a violation of protocol." High Arbiter Kelos raised his hands for silence. The guards stopped their advance, waiting for orders. The chamber gradually quieted, though the tension remained thick enough to cut. "Minister Okonkwo," Kelos said, his voice carrying through the chamber, "what you are doing is unprecedented. The Assembly has not yet voted on humanity's admission. You cannot simply claim this seat without permission." Amara remained seated. She looked at the High Arbiter calmly. "With respect, High Arbiter, I disagree." "You disagree? This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of law. The conclave has procedures. They must be followed." Amara stood up slowly, not because she was leaving the chair, but because she wanted everyone in the chamber to hear what she was about to say. "This chair was made from earth," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "It was carved from the stone of my world 10,000 years ago. It was placed in this chamber as a promise that someday humanity would take its place among the species of the galaxy." She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. "That promise was broken. Before we knew you existed, before we had a chance to speak for ourselves, you voted to reject us. You decided that we were unworthy based on the mistakes we made while we were still learning to walk upright. You judged us by our worst moments and ignored our best." The chamber was silent. "My grandfather stood where I am standing now, 50 years ago. He defended humanity against 5 challenges designed to humiliate us. He played Beethoven for species who had forgotten how to dream. He asked for nothing but a chance to prove ourselves." Amara paused. "You rejected him. You voted against humanity by a margin of 712 to 135, and then you expected us to leave." She smiled, the same smile her grandfather had smiled, and his grandmother before him. "We didn't leave. We stayed. We built New Geneva. We made alliances. We proved ourselves through our actions, not our words. We fought wars to protect species that the Conclave had ignored. We created art that changed the culture of the galaxy. We did everything you said we couldn't do." She sat back down in the granite chair. "This seat was always ours. It was built from our stone, placed here for our people, meant for our future. We are not asking for your permission to sit in it. We never were." High Arbiter Kelos looked at Amara for a long moment. He was old, even for a Morpath. He had served the Conclave for centuries. He had watched the galaxy change in ways that the founders could never have imagined, and he was tired of fighting against the inevitable. "The representatives will now vote," he announced. "The question is whether to formally recognize humanity as a member of the Galactic Conclave, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The voting began immediately. Each species registered its decision through the Assembly's ancient systems. Numbers appeared in the air above the chamber, updating in real time. In favor, against, in favor, against. The numbers climbed higher and higher. Amara watched without expression. She had done everything she could. She had spoken the words she needed to speak. Now the decision was out of her hands. The voting took nearly an hour. Every species had to be given time to register their choice. Some took longer than others, debating among themselves until the last possible moment. Finally, the numbers stopped changing. High Arbiter Kelos read the results. In favor of humanity's admission, 423 against 422. One vote. Humanity had been accepted by a single vote. The chamber exploded with sound, cheers and protests and everything in between. Species that had supported humanity rose to their feet in celebration. Species that had opposed screamed their outrage. But Amara did not move. She sat in the granite chair, her hands resting on the armrests that had been carved 10,000 years ago. She felt the rough stone beneath her fingers. She felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. They had won. After 10,000 years of waiting, after generations of struggle, after her grandfather's trial and her grandmother's hope, and every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered, they had finally won. But as the chaos swirled around her, Amara knew the truth. The vote had never really mattered. Humanity had claimed this seat the moment they refused to accept their rejection. They had claimed it when they built ships from stolen technology and crossed the galaxy without permission. They had claimed it when they stood in this chamber and demanded to be heard. They had claimed it when they stayed, year after year, proving themselves through their actions. The vote was just the galaxy finally acknowledging what had already been true for decades. The empty chair had always belonged to humanity. They had simply been waiting for the rest of the galaxy to realize it. Representatives from the species that had supported humanity approached her chair. The Kreth Collective was there, their forms shifting and flowing with what seemed like joy. The Alari were there, their ancient eyes bright with tears. The Morpath, who had first praised her grandfather's music, stood nearby, bowing his head in respect. "Welcome to the conclave," High Arbiter Kellos said. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that might have been approval. "The chair is yours now. What will you do with it?" Amara looked at the alien representatives surrounding her. She looked at the crystal ceiling that stretched toward infinity. She looked at the seat that her grandfather had described to her so long ago, on a balcony in Lagos, watching the sun set over the ocean. "We're going to change everything," she said. "Not by conquering or destroying, but by sharing. Our art, our music, our stories, our dreams. We're going to show the galaxy what it means to be human. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, all of it." She stood up from the chair and looked around the chamber. "You watched us for 10,000 years. You saw our wars and our mistakes and our failures. But you also saw our love and our hope and our stubborn refusal to give up. That's who we are. All of it. We don't hide from our darkness. We face it and try to be better." She touched the granite armrest one more time. "My grandfather told me something when I was a child. He said that when life isn't fair, you have two choices. You can give up, or you can keep fighting. Humanity has been fighting for its place in this galaxy since before we knew the galaxy existed. We fought our way here. We earned our seat." Amara looked at High Arbiter Kellos. "And now that we're here, we're going to make sure no one else has to fight as hard as we did. Every species that's been ignored, every civilization that's been dismissed, every people who've been told they're not worthy, they'll have a voice now, because we know what it's like to be excluded. We know what it's like to be judged before you've had a chance to speak." She sat back down in the granite chair. "This seat was always meant for us, but it's not just ours. It belongs to everyone who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something more." The chamber was quiet. Then slowly the Kreth began to vibrate with approval. The Alari began to sing. The Morpath began to chant. Species after species joined in, creating a sound that had never been heard in the Grand Assembly before. A celebration of something new, something different, something human. Amara sat in the chair and let the sound wash over her. Her grandfather had been right. You keep fighting until you win. And humanity had won. Not through conquest or violence or threats, not through superior technology or military might, through stubbornness, through creativity, through the simple, powerful refusal to accept that they didn't belong. The empty chair was empty no more, and the galaxy would never be the same. Far away on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, a statue stood in a public square. It showed a man at a piano, his hands raised above the keys, his face turned toward the sky. The inscription at the base of the statue read, "David Okonkwo, the first to speak for humanity, the first to believe we deserved our place among the stars." In the same square, children played games that mixed human traditions with alien ones. Musicians performed songs that blended Earth's music with melodies from 100 other worlds. Families gathered to watch the night sky, pointing out constellations that now had different meanings than they once had. Humanity had reached the stars, and the stars had reached back. The chair that had waited 10,000 years was finally occupied. Not because permission had been granted, but because the right had been claimed, and that in the end was the most human thing of all.